Hey friends, recently the Destiny 2 showcase dropped that was showing what's happening in the final shape, and if I don't give my thoughts on it, streaming is going to be very difficult, so I always feel obligated to do these type of things, and I just have some basic gameplay in the background of Prometheum Spur before it got nerfed. I think it got nerfed. I'll have to revisit it, and I also think with that spin right there, I'm on controller. But without further ado, I'm just going to hit each of the highlights and then give my overall thoughts on all of it, since some of these points tied together. And it's going to be in the order of appearance. So it starts with the story stuff, and I'm not really interested in the story. I like the universe, but really if I had to boil it down to something, it's more fun to be a Guardian than to be the Guardian. And they don't even acknowledge that you're the Guardian. Like, how many gods do you have to kill in Destiny before someone just accepts that you can probably handle the next task? The real star of the show is the Destiny universe, the Destiny world. It's way more interesting than having a reason to defend the Traveler in some epic finale. Like, I would just do a mundane task, exploring the ruins of some dead civilization and fighting bosses that appear along the way. That sounds way more fun to me, and so maybe that's a perspective that the narrative team just hasn't really heard before, is make it interesting to just be a Guardian. Next up, it showed some new enemies, which are always welcome, but I do have some bones to pick with the recent Tormentor. I think that one was a miss, but the Wyvern was definitely a hit and a threat. And so as long as these enemies are a threat, I think it can improve the complexity of PvE, which ultimately improves my enjoyment. Overall, I think new enemies need to be implemented in a way where they are difficult but readable, so that defeating them is a skill issue and not you just crossing your fingers hoping that they don't do that one unreadable animation and you die for it. So you have to risk, like, I'm 10 minutes into this GM, is it worth just rushing them, or should I be pigeonholed into this one really specific build and playstyle so that I have some semblance of control over my environment? Moving on, let's talk about the new abilities. They seem team play focused, which is great, but also dangerous historically to balance since most players are solo players. They're solo focused. An example of this is how I originally identified Triple Behemoth as extremely strong, like game-breaking strong. But it took literal years for this strategy to catch on, despite it being objectively one of the strongest ways to win. Me personally, I really like support builds in first-person shooters, and I gravitate towards them almost every time. Where the balance can go wrong, though, is when the support build is also simultaneously one of the strongest individually. It just doesn't work if it's that strong. It's a little too soon to tell with what we've seen so far and how the new abilities look, but I'll still give my gut feeling on all three: the Warlock, the Titan, and the Hunter. So starting with the Warlock, what was wrong with just bringing back Radiance, right? It could have just been 1-to-1 with that super, and I think it would have been fine. Obviously not self-res. On a side tangent, I think that anything that kicks my Guardian into third person is kind of just jarring. So I really like that we're getting a first person super with Warlock, and I will almost always choose a first person super for just aesthetic reasons alone. So in case you weren't tracking, the Warlock super is a juiced version of Radiance, a Destiny 1 super, which basically gives you armor, healing, and faster ability cooldowns. Now, I don't know if all of that is exactly how it's going to play out, but just judging from what I've seen. So, I strongly dislike abilities that have no counterplay or that are unbalanced on a power to cooldown to ease of use ratio. When's the last time that you died to a Flux Nade? Oh wait, you're thinking about it. It's been months. You haven't died to a Flux Grenade in months. When's the last time you died to a Warlock Arc Melee or a Shoulder Charge? Minutes, right? It happened last game. So now when I look at the juiced abilities that come with the new Radiant Super, I don't like that it gives you a homing bird grenade. That sounds so irritating to deal with, and I often find that from the user perspective, my homing abilities miss the intended target by overcorrecting. Like, I know how to throw a grenade and nail it. Let me do that. Let me have the option to do that. The part of the super that I find the most intriguing, though, is that it adds Scorch to weapons, and I think that's the first time in years that my Dawnblade is going to have a significant fragment change-up. I typically run the exact same Dawnblade setup, and I have for years. The only thing I switched out, I think, was chain ignitions for the Phoenix Dive at some point, but I think that's going to return, and I'm probably going to make an even bigger change-up that focuses on comboing 3 Warlocks together, triple Warlock, where we have 1 Well and 2 Radiance, and all 3 of us are on Scorch Chaining Fragments so that we can utilize our weapons to counter other supers and facilitate giant multi-kills. Might be a little problematic, but we'll see how it plays out. So I talked about the new super. They're also adding a new aspect, which is basically going to be Void Soul, but it's solar. For the love of the Traveler, can both of these abilities be updated to be interacted against? If I have the gun skill to track and shoot a Void Soul in the air as it travels, I shouldn't see immune tags, it should just break. And so I hope that they go back, fix Void Soul, and make it abundantly clear that the solar one needs to be shot in flight too. Now on to the Titan. The super looks badass. I'm usually a Titan super hater because it's just roaming Fist of Havoc with a new flavor. And now a side tangent that's kind of related. I really dislike the original Destiny 1 to Destiny 2 shift change of supers. They seriously did not all have to become roaming and tanky at the same time. Realistically, in endgame PvE, you're not going to be using a roaming super anyway because they're terrible compared to burst and support supers. Really, all the roaming supers do is just annoy PvP players, so I hope they walk back on this trend of roaming supers and rebuild some of them to be more like this Titan super. So what it is the Titan throws axes that are kind of like, for argument's sake, mini Nova bombs. Then you can go and pick up the axes after. 2 problematic thoughts. Number 1, this is another third-person mechanic that you can just pick up. And then number 2, if I can't shoot the axe off the floor before it detonates, it's going to be very annoying to deal with. Now onto the aspect. You consume your grenade and turn it into a shield, which later releases all the damage into a handheld supernova, like the Warlock ability. So the Titan has to close the gap to utilize the damage. On first glance, this looks like they didn't really learn a lesson from Ursa Furiosa having no counterplay, because if someone puts up a shield and you're punished for shooting the shield, how do you deal with it? But on second glance, I kinda hope a Titan uses this shit so we can freeze them with conditional finality. Now on to the Hunter. The Hunter super didn't reveal enough for me to theorycraft. However, the Hunter super is a throwing knife. You teleport to the knife, and then you spin to win. I wonder if the spin to win part is optional, because my first thought is throwing the knife at a ceiling, teleporting to it the jump shot, and then using my remaining knives to set up a future escape in case something goes wrong. So in other words, I really like the supers that complement gunplay and first-person shooter, and not the roaming supers that interrupt it. Overall, the super looks really badass, and there's a good chance that it has less toolbox than I'm giving it credit in theory crafting, so I kinda hope it exceeds my expectations. The aspect they're adding is an elevation attack that gives amplified to both you and your teammates. I don't want to read too much into the Vidoc style commentary on these videos because it's definitely curated, and if you just like asked them at a bar, they would probably say something else, but in that section of the video, one of the devs said, "The new Arcstrider abilities felt like a fighting game." And I'm going to go on a mega tangent here because that comment unfairly irritates me. So, I think the overall ability to weapon sandbox works best when it's built through the lens of a fighting game. Like, I genuinely hope Bungie picks up more recruits that have a rich history of fighting game interactions to take into their development ideas. So let's break down that comment. In my opinion, Arcstrider does have some elements that might give you that fighting game feel for sure, but the real fighting game class might surprise you. Want to take a guess? Shadebinder is the real fighting game class. Think about it. To use the kit effectively, it's all about deliberate spacing and timing to open up an execution-based combo window. There was a patch a few years ago where I made a detailed document that broke down all the combo lines that a Shadebinder could take with various builds to kill supers and facilitate multi-kills. Since then, Shadebinder was nerfed in a way that ruined most of these combos, but at least the fundamentals remain. The main fighting game interaction that I'm missing from Destiny 2 PvP balance is the whiff punish. So many powerful, easy to use abilities are almost immediately actionable, meaning that, for example, during an Antaeus Titan slide, they have full invincibility, but are at the same time able to deal damage. That makes zero sense from a balancing perspective. The fighting game approach would be to make it so that the Antaeus slide is inactionable for slightly longer than the duration of the reflect. That way it gives your opponent a fair opportunity to punish a whiffed reflect. I'll give you another example of a fighting game interaction. If I see an opponent has a Nova Bomb charged at the top of the screen, then I'll try to space myself out in a way that when they commit to the animation, I might be able to throw a Glacier Nade that blocks the line of sight, that is close enough to activate quickly so I live, but far enough to turn the Nova Bomb into a self-destruct. And when you hit a clip like this in PvP, it's phenomenal. Moments like that are just amazing. And I really think that it'd be worth it for the devs to take a look at overall all the animation speed and punishment opportunity windows as a more reliable balancing dial to add to their repertoire. In addition, I'd love to see some low-cost, skill-intensive deflect abilities baked into future kits and reimagined into old kits. To be fair implementation though, they need to not be actionable and have enough end lag to be whiff punished if used in the wrong spacing and timing, kinda like my Antaeus example. Ideally, this should empower PvP players to better navigate the bad feeling of being hit by the kitchen sink when your opponent knows that they're outgunned in this first-person shooter. The last idea I want to drop here is using the super bar as a mana meter to change the functionality of abilities, but not necessarily in a more powerful way. An example would be holding the melee button on Shadebinder to make the Penumbral Blast projectile travel at about half speed. One might think on first glance that that's not really worth your super bar, but for a combo, that quite literally is the difference of successfully chain freezing and not. I could go on about how fucking cool it would be to have the PvP sandbox more crafted for fighting game interactions, but I'll dream about this in another video. That was just a comment that Neuron activated, and I felt compelled to tell y'all about it. So moving on, we're now talking about the weapons. There's a new exotic fusion rifle that looks lethal, and you consume a nade for a linear fusion mode, and that seems kinda dangerous in concept, but of course I'm gonna have to play it out. It does ruin the value of a fast charging nade though if you think about it, so I'm kind of worried about that, but I'll wait till I actually use it for further comment. They're also adding a Traveler Beam, Red Death, the Kvostov, and weirdly, Dragon's Breath is the one that I'm excited about because in Destiny 1, I used to use it for airstrikes, but all the ones I listed, it's going to be fun to have some new toys. They also added a new sidearm archetype, and firstly when I see it, I think of Torg because it's an explosion sidearm, but I saw the bullet home on to somebody, and I'm praying that it's either weak or exotic because that seems a little ridiculous. Maybe I'll have to watch the footage again, but again, I have to have it in my hands before I can really comment further. There's a new healing frame of auto rifle, which in my opinion finally makes auto rifles a competitive option. I recently switched my in-game sense, and the background footage right now you're seeing my old sense, but now I'm on more than twice as fast as it. And so I've been on an auto rifle grind to help me have better tracking. I could just imagine beaming an opponent and then snap aiming to my teammate as we bait and switch. Like high key, that fixes auto rifles and makes it a competitive option. And if it sounds too powerful on first glance, well, they can of course tweak, all the dials that they have at their disposal, including the amount that it heals. Okay, now the background gameplay should be shifting to, I think, an Onyo D submachine gun gameplay in Iron Banner. Just, again, thoughts on the showcase. Continuing on, the next part was about Cade 6. I kind of dislike the characters in the game overall. The real star of the show, like I said earlier, is the world building. The environments are way more interesting. So long story short, the story ain't for me. Next, the showcase pivots to the current seasonal offerings. I saw a deck of cards, and I immediately was on board with what the team was cooking. I think in recent seasons, they're proving that they can create PvE activities in the future that really capture the feeling of being a Grandmaster. Might be a year, might be 2 years before we see PvE that catches up to our Guardian's power though, so I'm not really going to hold my breath, and I'll stick to self-imposed challenges as usual. I've been doing more low-man raids and whatnot just because they're fun, and for no other reason. And every time I'm doing them, I keep thinking, why can't there be any content in the game like this that is that difficult intentionally? But I'll save that one for another day. Next in the showcase was the in-game LFG. Last night, I went on Bungie.net, and I saw an LFG post that was saying, quote, "Last GM for the season, I'm drunk, you've been warned," end quote. So I immediately wanted to join that fire team because it was funny. And yes, we knocked out that GM without a hitch. So if Bungie wants to skip the step of going to the website, then I can only be excited for players that might make a new friend as a result. The final part of the showcase was that the seasonal model was going to shift to longer seasons called X. the biggest takeaway for me was that, oh shit, the final shape isn't the end of Destiny 2. Overall, longer season or shorter season, I'd appreciate having more permanent quality of life changes being prioritized over adding a new horde mode that gets filtered out later in the lifespan of the game. In my opinion, the real meat and potatoes of the future of PvE is a Grandmaster roguelite activity. That's it. If they can nail that in the future, I'd play more PvE. In fact, I just looked at all the weapon rolls and additions of this season, and I'm kind of disappointed in a lot of them. So I probably am going to fill my week with a little bit more master PvE content instead of the normal grind of rushing to obtain the new toys. I hate how these returning weapons have different perk pools, but I'm going to stop that tangent there because that one can get pretty long. The final thoughts overall is that I'm definitely burnt out as a Destiny veteran. The game feels easier than it ever has. While PvP can be balanced at times, that power target is so high that the skill gap feels compressed, so when the matchmaking doesn't work perfectly, the game falls apart. There's still a good chance that I end up making content on the new Checkmate game mode, almost exclusive content, like I will stop making normal PvP content and only focus on Checkmate. One of my biggest pain points in Destiny has been something that's been there since the beginning, so I'm honestly surprised that I've stuck with the game for this long. I am an intrinsic player, meaning that I play for the enjoyment of playing. I don't play to unlock something, I unlock something to play with. This is a player archetype that's seemingly in opposition to what sells copies. I'm finding myself saying, oh, that's a cool item in the game, I'd love to use it in this build. Unfortunately, I'll never see that roll no matter how much time I sink in, so I guess I won't be able to use it. And then in both PvE and PvP, I find myself saying, oh, that sounds like a fun idea. Maybe I'll be able to use it when X gets nerfed in 4 months, but by the time that'll happen, something else will be added that somehow also renders that fun idea moot. There's definitely an element to my jadedness that stems from optimizing the fun out of the game, but at the same time, I'd love to see the PvE reward structure shifted to give different deterministic routes to items for interacting with difficult and less time-efficient activities, because in the current system, I'm just going to play the most time-efficient option without thinking. I genuinely enjoy, like for example, the new Grandmaster Battlegrounds, but I don't feel obligated to play them because it's an opportunity cost for more efficient strikes providing me RNG rewards that make tangible fun in PvP. So ultimately, this is my lesson learned as a Halo and Destiny veteran. You never know when you're in the GOAT era of a game. When you're in the zone and you feel the slightest hint that you're going to enjoy the era, savor every second of that fun patch. When you're not enjoying yourself, or when you think the reward is not worth the grind, please just play something else. I'm always going to make content for this game, but my desire to make it feel like an extension of my hand and be tapped into the matrix, that'll probably go away during a bad patch. My viewers know when I'm in that mindset because the fun is undoubtedly contagious. And as I've done for the past few years, I'll continue trying other games that make me excited to share why I'm having fun, and maybe sometimes that will also be Destiny. There was certainly some good shit in the showcase for sure. I appreciate y'all watching to the end and hearing me out. Thanks for the channel support as usual. I think that covers everything I wanted to say today. So, bye!